Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Summer Queer YA Contemporary panel, where we usher in my favorite genre pairings, where we talk about contemporary reads in summer. Beginning of summer, basically, depending on when you decide summer starts. So I'm really glad to be chatting with all these amazing authors. I had such a fun time, like reading the books back to back, basically. Um, and I'm just going to say a little bit about me first, and then the authors are going to introduce themselves and tell us about their books. And then we will chat about the books and all of the questions that I had. Well, not all the questions I had. The questions I selected for this, I had many other questions I did not pick. So if you didn't know who I am, my name is Lily. I'm the moderator for this panel, and I'm like the space, I guess, behind Utopia State of Mind on the internet. So, Adiba, do you want to start off with the intros?
Yes, so I'm Adiba Jagardar. I'm the author of The Henna Wars, Honey and Issues Guide to Fake Dating, A Million to One, and my newest book is The Do's and Donuts of Love. And it basically follows Shirin Malik, who is a Bangladeshi Irish girl, and she's reeling from a breakup when she enters a Great British Bake Off style reality TV show called the Junior Irish Baking Show. And once she gets there, she realizes that her ex-girlfriend is a competitor, and so is a new girl that she's developing feelings for. So things get a little bit messy, both in terms of baking and in terms of feelings.
Hi, I'm Johnny Garzavia. I write contemporary YA literature that's usually very queer and very brown, inspired by my own Texas upbringing. My newest book is Under and Santi We're Here, which is about a non binary muralist who takes a gap year before going off to college and falls for the newest waiter at their family's taqueria, and romance and chaos ensue.
I am Meredith Ireland. I write YA. I'm the author of The Jasmine Project and let's see, Everyone Hates Kelsey Miller, which we'll be talking about today. And also, I just got my arc for Emma and the Love Spell. It is a queer witchy parent trap, and it is gorgeous. It is so beautiful, and I will be sharing that on Wednesday because that means it's right at the edge of a API month and Pride. So Kelsey is about a girl who gets ghosted by her best friend, and she and her academic arch rival form this very ill-conceived plot to go to the University of Pennsylvania to try to win them back before school starts.
Hi, I'm Dahlia Adler. I'm the author of a bunch of books, Cool for the Summer, Home Field Advantage, and coming out very soon, going by Coastal, which used to be Biting Doors, because that's what it is. It's by sliding doors about a girl named Natalia who has to decide which parent she's spending the summer with on which coast. And there is a girl that she's been crushing on forever in the New York half of the book, and a boy that she meets in the LA half of the book. It alternates chapters between the two of them and those developing romances. So I like to say it's two romances for the price of one. I think it's really cute and Cool for the Summer is coming out in paperback soon too. So I'm just gonna show that. Yeah, and I run a site called LGBTQ Reads on which you can find more about all these fine books.
Hi, everyone. I am Julian Winters, author of, like Dahlia, many of books. I don't want to list them all for you, but like my most recent ones, The Summer of Everything, Right Where I Left You, and then As You Walk On By, which is, I like to call my Breakfast Club meets Can't Hardly Wait, where a teen black boy who is gay is dared by his best friend to ask his crush to prom at this epic spring break house party. And Theo, being the guy who never likes to turn down a challenge, accepts the dare, not realizing that he's never asked a boy out in public. So when he's at the party, he decides to hide in the upstairs bedroom to kind of get his stuff together. And while hiding out, he runs into several of his classmates who he either has some kind of history with or possibly someone he's crushing on outside of his actual crush. And it's just a night of epic shenanigans and Waffle House madness, and Theo discovering the person that he wants to really be at school versus who he's been there.
Perfect. Okay, the first question that I have is for everybody, and it's that wanting to prove ourselves, I think, is a really central theme in general, but also to all of your books, you know, whether it be to our friends, our families, or even ourselves, and what that means to ourselves, right? Like, what would it take to prove ourselves? And I think it's such a complex thing to feel as a person and also as a teen in the YA sphere. So I would love to know if you could all talk about what this theme specifically means to your main character. Adiba, do you also want to start us off?
Yes. So with the do's and donuts of love, Shirin is obviously trying to prove prove something to herself, but she's also trying to kind of prove to her parents that, you know, she is capable of kind of going out into the world and taking on this reality TV show and coming out of it, like not even like successful in terms of the competition, but just successful in terms of like who she is and just being able to deal with it. And she's trying to kind of prove to her best friend Fatima and to herself that she is okay and she's, you know, handling her breakup in like a very great way. And to me, it was important to kind of deal with this theme because Shirin is obviously like multiply marginalized. She's not just queer, she's also Bangladeshi Irish. She's fat, she has anxiety. And so all of these things, I think when you have these marginalizations, a lot of the time the world tells you that you can't do a lot of things. And Shirin is definitely somebody who has, you know, seen that from outside forces. And so I think it's important for somebody like Shirin in the real world, but also in the fictional world, to kind of be able to see that they are capable of doing all of these things and facing these challenges. Even if, again, they don't necessarily come out of it successful, that's not what it's about. It's about kind of being able to go at it head on and tackle those challenges.
Yeah, I think that like this idea is really why I love writing YA, and I think I love writing upper YA in particular, that like 17, 18, even 19 age range, where it's like you as a young person are given these things that make you feel so much more adult like and independent as you've ever been in your entire life. You have like college and what's coming up next and what do you want to be for the rest of your life, all like in your hands and waiting to be decided. But then also you are reminded constantly about the fact that you are also incredibly powerless and like you don't have as much influence as you think you do. And so like balancing these two things together um is really something that I love just exploring in different ways. I think with Under in particular, the expectation is also something that melds a lot with just the idea of love. Like Under, it comes from a family that really loves them and like wants the best for them, and so like pushes college and pushes being better than, you know, the things that like you can have within your own neighborhood in San Antonio. But also like a love for themselves and like trying to find the love that they do for their art and not being boxed in by like the powers that be in that world that can often be racist and sometimes queerphobic, and just having some sort of like self-determination for yourself. um yeah, like I think that like finding a way in which like to push that in a way that makes sense for that main character is something that I really love looking for.
So for Kelsey, what I wanted to do was I went to in New York City, they're not called magnet schools. They are called the Elite Nine, which is an extremely humble way of saying the same thing. But there's this pressure that comes along with that privilege, right? Like you're kind of expected to be something. So I wanted to have a character who, like, wants to be something but doesn't know what that is, and she's watching everybody around her having a seemingly very easy time. They've wanted to be a doctor or a businesswoman or whatever since they were small, and she doesn't know what she wants to be yet, and her family has made big sacrifices for her to stay in New York and to stay at the school. And it's they don't they don't put any pressure on her. She puts pressure on herself. And I think that that's something that a lot of teens can relate to.
So what was fun for me with going by coastal is in my first, not my first two books, but my two most recent books, which are the ones people have actually read, there's a lot of queer angst, and the first one is really about compulsory heterosexuality and, you know, trying to figure out and prove to yourself that you're bi. And then the second one involves, you know, more closeting for safety and things like that. But Going by Coastal is my first book where the main character is already very confidently out and all her friends are confidently out. Um, and so it was nice to have a book where proving she's queer and or queer enough was not a factor. So I really, really enjoyed that not being the element of proving herself. And so it's more standard her future. So Natalia is Jewish, as am I. And it is very focused on, you know, in general, Jewish culture is very focused on education. So college and what you're going to do for a living. And it's, you know, a lot of lawyers, doctors, dentist, and she's sort of trying to figure out her path there with these two very career-driven parents. One is a math professor, one is in marketing. So less traditional jobs, but you know, definitely still focused on that. And so they want from her what she's going to be, but she doesn't feel like either of those paths are for her, and she's trying to figure it out. And the whole book is her trying to figure it out. How to make her relationship work with her mother and prove her mom was wrong for moving to another coast and basically leaving her behind, and proving that she potentially has a professional future, even if she can't quite figure it out. It is still in kind of a low stakes way. There's an acknowledgement that she's in a privileged position to do it because one of her love interests comes from a much less comfortable background. And so she says, you know, the irony is, you know exactly what you want to do and you can't make it happen for yourself. Whereas I know, like, I have the privilege where whatever I choose, I could get the support, but I can't figure out what that is. And so, you know, it sort of plays on it in different ways. Yeah, and it was really fun to explore how she would come to an answer in both timelines. Everything is about coming to, you know, an answer in two different timelines that are not as different as she thought they would be. Yeah, so that was fun to do, but also to have it feel a little lower stakes than maybe some past books of mine have been.
I'm so much like Johnny. This is one of the reasons I love writing YA, is because it is definitely in that like hyper like pressurized age where you're supposed to know everything that you're supposed to know all your next steps. As soon as you take off that cap and gown, you are suddenly this fully formed adult and you know everything that you're going to do. And it's so not true. But that's the expectation that's continuously put on young adults is, what's your next plan? What are you going to do after this? You know, and you're supposed to know all these answers when you're still just figuring out who the hell you want to be. And so that's why I love writing in that space, because even as the adult that I am, there are so many times where I just have no clue who I am and what it is I want to do next. So I love writing in this space, and especially for As You Walk On By, it looks at a lot of different things where Theo is expected to know these things or expected to follow a certain path, and he's just like, but why? Why do I have to do these things? He is like Meredith. He goes to a magnet school, because in the South, we do call them magnet school. Elite 9, though, sounds way cooler. I'm gonna like propose that to somebody. But yeah, so he goes to a magnet school, and he's not like everyone else, where he comes from this privileged background where like his parents immediately get him into it. He had to work really hard to get in there, and now he's continuously fighting to stay within that system. And he deals with the pressure of that. He also deals with the pressure of his father, who's just like, I have this set plan for you to go to college, to do these certain things, to finally break out. It's a look at generational expectations, especially within like, for someone who's a person of color, where it's continuously like, you're going to be the one to break the cycle. You're going to be the breakout. You're going to be the one who moves on and does all these amazing things. Theo's family comes from generation after generation who grew up in Kentucky, stayed in Kentucky, died in Kentucky, kind of thing. And his father's kind of like, no, you're going to be the one who's going to do these great things. And Theo's like, but also, what's so bad about, where we're from and, the things that I've gotten here. So he wrestles with that. He also wrestles with the expectation from friends, and who he's supposed to be at school and what he's supposed to represent, the things that he's supposed to care about, when in actuality, he doesn't care about any of those things. He's trying to figure out how to navigate that space and speak his mind. And also, at the end of the day, the biggest thing that he wants for himself is to kind of have that epic prom night, that, one great love story moment, with another boy that he doesn't get to see around in his community. He is one of a few queer kids, and he kind of feels like this is not meant for me, because I never get to see it. And it's his chance to kind of break out and have that moment for himself and fight back against that expectation of you're supposed to follow this path, when actually this is all that he wants to do. So yeah, I just love exploring that space, because I feel like that is the continuous theme for teens to deal with, is the expectation from others and how do they deal with it.
I love those answers so much. Before I go on to my next question, I wanted to also say that if anyone from the audience has questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I see that we're already starting, so definitely keep going, and I will scroll back up to them. Johnny, I love what you were saying about why you write YA and this duality between like being in a position where you're supposed to have more kind of agency over your decisions, but also there are so many things and expectations that are out of your control, like sort of things that you're supposed to do to be successful, quote unquote, but like they're not in your control. You can only work as hard. I could go on, but what I want to say, or what I want to ask, is that what keeps you coming back to the contemporary genre? And also, where do you find inspiration when you're struggling with either genre or, like ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think just one, contemporary is my favorite to read, so that kind of just lends itself to like, I'm gonna write this. But I think also just, especially in this time, whenever like queer and especially queer BIPOC authors are kind of like turned or forced to make their writing into like an activism sort of thing, whether or not we ask for it, it almost becomes like I'm recording a history sort of thing. Like I'm recording how it is to live queer and brown in Texas in 2018, in 2021, in 2022. And that's going to be here. Like these stories will remain no matter how long goes by. Whenever this becomes like historical fiction, it'll still be there as this is what life was like. And I think that's kind of like why, and I totally get why some people don't like it, but why I like putting in like the pop cultural references and like what my characters are listening to and watching, because like that's what we're doing here and now. And I think that like it can be okay to like add specificities into it when like you're really just trying to get into, like, it doesn't have to be something that is universal and lasts forever. It's fine if these things become things of the past, but it's still just a reflection of a time, and it'll always be a reflection of a time that is important to me, and I think important to a lot of queer Latina kids in Texas right now. Um, Whenever I'm having trouble writing, I love going to like other forms of media. I love books, but like also like countless shows on Netflix have been an inspiration for my writing. Like One Day at a Time fully inspired 1500 Miles from the Sun so much. Hentified inspired Under and Santi Were Here. I love like getting other forms of media, whether it's that or like music, and like I listen to like Spanish music whenever I'm writing, so I don't like fully get caught up in the lyrics and start like lip syncing in my room while I'm writing. But then also I'm listening to a lot of mariachi. Maybe it's time I write my mariachi book. And so like other things that necessarily aren't books really help inspire me too.
Sorry, I would like everyone also to answer this question. Sorry, I loved what Johnny said, so I wanted to use that as like my segue to the next question, but then I forgot to specify this is obviously for everybody.
Thank you. So I started writing contemporary. It is my preferred genre to read also. But the thing that prompted me to start writing in the beginning is I just had this epiphany when I was like pretty little that, this is my one life. And I grew up an observant Orthodox Jew and still am. So I'm like, there's all these things that I don't do that I'm never going to do, even if it's just like silly things like I'm never going to eat bacon. And I was like, oh, I know a way it can be like I'm doing that. And that is how I started writing books, because I was living vicariously through the books I was reading. And then I was like, I can do it even more if I do it through the books I'm writing. And so in a way, I still really like doing that, especially as somebody who came out later and is now sort of starting again with queer lit. That's been a really, really big thing for me. The other thing I like about contemporary is that you have to deal with the real world to solve your problems. You have to, I mean, look, you can write something that's like so fluffy, it's fantastical. But on the whole, I try to stay within what I feel is the realm of reality for the characters. And I really like that you have to work within that. You have to work within what people can do and meet people where they are and work with the world around you. And to me, that's a really, really satisfying part of writing contemporary, and a challenge in its own right. And I also am a big consumer of other media if I'm stuck. Two of my books came from reading basically just like other mid-list YAs where I'm like, this would be really interesting if it were queer. Like that's basically where both Cool for the Summer and Going by Coastal came from. I read two books I really enjoyed, and there was a certain plot point from them. I was like, I want to do this, but I want to do this a little bit differently. And that's where they came from. So I find reading other YA really inspirational in that way. I don't watch as much TV or movies. I kind of just watch Grey's Anatomy over and over again. Um, but I try with music, especially. Sometimes that can do it too. And Home Field Advantage was literally inspired by a photograph in the newspaper. So other media really is just the best thing for me. Julian, just talk.
Somebody. I was trying to click the button.
I see you hovering.
I was trying to click the button. It would not click.
I see you. I see you when I feel the pain and I'm calling on you.
I'm like, what is this technical difficulty? I such a similar thing, Dolly, to you is writing in the contemporary space is I grew up just not having enough of it, especially like from a queer representation and from a BIPOC representation. And so I cling to contemporary because it is so much dealing with the real world and what we're going through. And I just don't want the next generation to kind of feel that, where they feel like I'm not seen, I'm not there. And I want to give them that spark of hope while actually looking at things that we deal with in the real world and whatnot. I think that's contemporary is a great space to start that with, because the reader is set into something that they can really relate to, and they get to see the little sparks and start to feel that little glow inside of them, like, wow, I can be a part of this, and I can be out there, and I can be seen, and who I am and what I'm feeling has been validated by someone else. And I think that is such like an excellent beginning for anyone to kind of start to grow into themselves and hopefully do what we're doing. Hopefully it inspires other writers to say, you know what, I want to do what Dahlia did, and I see this storyline, but I'd love it to just go all the way to this side, and I'd love it to be even bigger and even gayer and all these other things. I hope that's what our books do for them, is give that inspiration to say, you know what, I can do this, and I will do this. So that's why I keep coming back to the contemporary space, because I think it's just such a great launching pad for feeling that hope, for feeling that wholeness, that I feel like a lot of BIPOC and queer readers would love to have. As far as if I get stuck, I kind of created this, I don't want to say foolproof, but kind of created this way where it's just like, okay, I know this is going to happen. I know exactly when it's going to happen in every book. So I make a Pinterest board full of stuff, so that I can remember like what was my inspiration. Like Dahlia, I know, like Home Field Advantage has that one picture. Like I'll find something like that where I'll find like a picture that inspired the actual story and have it on the Pinterest board. So I can go back to like, oh yeah, this is what I was feeling. I turn to music. Also, I create hella long playlists just so I know the feeling I want. I will make sub playlists inside of the playlist for certain scenes. It's really detailed and really bad. So those are the kind of things that I go back to. But also I feel very privileged where I can now go back to writing in like coffee shops and like that. And I kind of get to observe the real world. And one of my favorite things is watching this current generation and how they just don't care. They just do not care what you think about what they're wearing, what they're doing, who they're in love with, like all these different things. And sitting there and just kind of like sipping my latte and seeing someone just kind of walk in and be boldly themselves, that helps me get back into what it is that I want to write and what I want to do, because I want to continue to remind people that no matter where you are, it's okay to be in love with who you are. And so that's kind of where my inspiration, when I do get stuck, comes from.
I'm similar to Julian in terms of I really came to the contemporary genre because I grew up at a time when there was so little representation in books and in media in general, and I obviously grew up in Dublin, Ireland, which was not the most diverse place in the world to grow up. So like in my school, I think I was like the only South Asian person in my entire year, and one of like only a handful in my entire school. And so I didn't see like a lot of people who looked like me in general. And so I think growing up a lot of the times, I love books so much, but I felt like books didn't love me just because I was like, okay, these people are having these experiences, but what does it mean? Like, I don't understand what these experiences are. So I think like one of the reasons why I was really drawn to the contemporary genre is because I think, I wanted to almost write to that teenage Adiba who didn't have those books, but also in that way kind of write to the teenage kids who are, in Ireland right now, but also like in the world, who maybe have never seen themselves in the media and hopefully now get a chance to see themselves. And similar to everybody else, I really get a lot of inspiration from media. Like Honey and Issues Guide to Fake Dating was entirely inspired by faking it and wanting to like write a sapphic, a sapphic version of that didn't fall into some stereotypes. So I definitely, go back to TV shows, movies, other books, music a lot when I get stuck.
So very similarly to what Adiba said, I grew up and I didn't see myself represented in anything that I read for school. And I think a lot of writing contemporary, a lot of writing in general is trying to make sure that that doesn't happen going forward. That going forward, when anybody, like for me, I'm a Korean American adoptee, there was no rep. Like it didn't exist. If you found yourself kinda in a book, like the Joy Luck Club was great, but that's Chinese, and also like it is from a culture that I'm not from. So the beautiful thing is, I have like a stack of the books, like there's now these books and they all have an adoptee main character who's like me. So and Lily. So I don't really get stuck. I love to read. I read across the categories. I'm writing across the categories. I love, like Dahlia said, taking inspiration from other stories that I've read, and I'm like, wow, how did they do that? How did they make that work? I just read Hellbent, and I'm like, how did this work? Like, how is she able to do this? And I just find a ton of inspiration from that.
You hear me pleading, don't spoil it, don't spoil it. I haven't read it yet.
Okay, I have a few questions that pair up some of the books, and I'd love to chat a little bit more in depth about certain themes within the books. Also, we have some beautiful questions. I love them so much, but obviously, if you have more questions, we feel free to drop them in the chat. But making amends and friendship difficulties, I think, are both really strong threads in the do's and the do's and donuts of love. Okay, almost. And as you walk on by, and I was wondering if both of you could talk about the friendship groups in your books and how your main characters think of themselves in terms of their friends. And over the course of the book, what do you think is the number one lesson they learn? Maybe related to friends, but I'll let you decide. Julian, do you want to start?
I had to think about what is the lesson that we learned. Yeah, so and as you walk on by, Theo starts off with this core group of friends. They are called TNT. They are been his friends for forever and a day. And he loves them, but he also recognizes, one, he is the only queer person in this friend group, so a lot of the privilege and a lot of things that they see and comment on, he can't relate to because he doesn't have those things. He doesn't see them, and he doesn't have access to them either. And so there are moments where it's a lot of like he's very uncomfortable or wants to say things but doesn't know how to say the things that he wants to, because these are your friends. And while you should always feel comfortable speaking your mind with your friends, sometimes there are moments where you feel just a little too vulnerable to say things that you want to say. So he's dealing with that. And then as he goes to the party, he lands into a group of people that he would never hang out with at school, and kind of slowly starts to find all those little threads that he was missing in his core friend group that he finds in them, where he gets to be himself, where he gets to be vulnerable, where he gets to be open, where he gets to see that, yes, as a queer Black boy growing up in the South, these are things that you do have access to if you have the right people around to kind of uplift you, and to help you get to the place that you want to go. So I really love showing that contrast, especially as someone who didn't realize until late in life that just because you grew up with people and they've been your friends forever doesn't mean that they stay your friends forever. It doesn't mean that you don't grow apart. It doesn't mean that you don't grow out of that relationship. And so that was a really big thing for me to show, especially in situations where one of those friends uses microaggressions or uses language that can be harmful or doesn't advocate for you in spaces that they should. And so I think that was the biggest lesson that Theo takes from his night of partying and whatnot, is that it's okay to walk away from situations, especially friendships, if they are no longer healthy to you or if they're harmful to you. It's okay to recognize that just because someone has been there for you in the past and done wonderful things from your past doesn't mean you have to accept the person that they are currently. And so, like I said, walk away until they're really ready to, realize who it is that they are and who it is that they should be. And it's not your job to educate them on those things and make them the better person. That's on them. So yeah, that's what Theo learns from it.
I feel like in the Do's and Donuts of Love, it's like the exact opposite of Julian's book, because Shirin has a very, very close best friend called Fatima, and that's essentially like her entire friend group. And the two of them are very, very close. But the thing that Shirin is really kind of dealing with this summer, which is when the book takes place, is that Fatima is not in Ireland. She is in Bangladesh for the summer. And I really want to write this specific friendship dynamic because I think that when you are like the child of an immigrant or an immigrant yourself, that is something that happens a lot. And you kind of have to navigate like almost a long distance friendship. Sometimes just over the summer, which is, lucky for Shirin and Fatima. But like for me, I had like friends back in Bangladesh after I moved to Ireland, and it was like forever a long distance friendship, which is, I think it's really tough when you're a teenager to try and deal with that and figure out what to do. And Shirin is kind of going through all of these like ups and downs in her relationships and trying to figure out like who she is and what she wants. And her best friend in the world is not there to support her. So I think she is kind of really struggling to just deal without Fatima there by her side, just because of how close Fatima is to her. And I think the biggest lesson that she kind of learns from that is that Shirin can kind of stand on her own, and she shouldn't take Fatima for granted at the same time. Because I think there are certain points in the book where she kind of almost lashes out at Fatima for not being there. And she kind of has to recognize that friendship isn't just about being there for each other, like physically. She also has to recognize the way Fatima is there when she's not there, and how she can kind of reciprocate that, and how she can be a good friend to Fatima while she is also being a good friend to her.
Yeah, and I also think that one of the lessons I learned in As You Walk On By, and that's why I was thinking about this question, was that like the point of saying sorry is not that someone will accept it, if that makes any sense, what I just said. And that when I read that, I was like, whoa, that is so true. But anyway, the next question I have is that in Under and Santi, we're here and going by coastal. Both of your main characters are grappling with like being unsure about their future, the expectations of their family. Um, and so they're stuck between a few different options, that they're weighing over in their minds. So I would love to know if you could both talk about what each of these options represent for your main character. It's not always necessarily simple as like, oh, I'll do this or this. There's so many ties and like baggage associated with each of those things. And then how do your characters' families impact their vision of that future? Dahlia, do you want to start?
Sure. I probably have a much simpler answer because to be honest, this was my like low stakes, really chill book, very intentionally because I just feel like um, teens kind of needed a break from feeling like every single decision they make is either monumental or irrelevant. And I find that a lot in sliding doors narratives where either it's this one ending was fated, so no choice that you made was ever going to make a difference, or the choice is so big that if you make the wrong one, like your life is over. I mean, that's kind of the original story it's based in is that model. And I wanted to craft a narrative where it was like, they can both be good choices. Like there doesn't have to be a wrong one. And that was the entire thing I wanted out of going by coastal. So like when I see like not much happens in reviews, I'm like, yep, that sure is the case. That sure was intentional. Um, that you can kind of find your path either way. And for me, that was really, really the biggest thing. It's obviously not a privilege that everybody has, but I did want to write a story that did have that. And so for Natalia, she's choosing between staying home, which is sort of like the safe thing on the parental front and the safe thing on the friend front, but the riskier thing on the romantic front, because it means she has to confront these feelings that she has just, sort of dodged and admired this girl from afar for a billion years. And then she also doesn't know what she would do for a job for the summers. So, but if she goes to LA, safer on the romantic front because she doesn't anticipate anything necessarily, and safer on the job front because it's lined up for her. But it means living with her mom, with whom she is basically estranged, and sort of has a terrible relationship, and she doesn't know what that's going to be like. So it's picking a lesser of the evils, and seeing which way would really help to getting her where she needs to be. And so it's how she gets there in each path. So yeah, it was fun to write, and it was a matter of choosing two different things that had their pros and cons because there also aren't perfect choices. And that's the book. Basically, that's like the whole thing is making that choice, and getting to see how both of them would play out. So that's the other thing. It's like you don't have she made this choice and now you never get to find out what would happen on the other side. She never gets to find out. And it's like there's this point towards the end where she says the same thing in both chapters, as if like she can't imagine having made that other choice. Which I feel like is like funny for the reader, I hope. But you're just like, but we know. And yeah, I like the reading experience of that. I hope other people do too.
I think for Under and Santi, we're here. Under is mainly juggling like the knowledge that like in just like 8-10 months they're going to be going to Chicago for art school and like fully throwing themselves into that, but also like kind of still wanting to hook themselves into like the community that they were raised in and the people that they've always been surrounded by and kind of like their own comfort level. That's also been the best place for them to like figure out the kind of art that they do and the sort of muralist they want to be. But all kind of like centered around just trying to find worth in and love of the art that they do for themselves and for the community and for just everyone. I think that like there's a sort of push from their family, like I said earlier, of like wanting to be more and go more and do more, but also like trying to navigate a space that isn't necessarily always welcome for them, while like realizing that at the same time if they stay in San Antonio, then that might be like all that they ever go to and reach. And so like trying to figure out where their heart is and where they want to be at, and luckily having people and a person in particular who shows Onder like how much that art is worth to them and in their heart and soul and how much it feeds them culturally speaking. um as far as their family, I think that like just in general how Anders' family has shaped them is I really wanted to paint a picture of what a queer person, especially a queer young person, could be if like their family just from day one accepted and embraced everything that they are. And that then turns into an 18, 19-year old who is so accepting of themselves and so loud and emotional and loving and creative. And so I think their family in a lot of ways has impacted them, not just like in the few hundred pages of this book, but in the 18 years before this book even takes place, of like all the things that they've done to support this kid has now become exactly who they are now.
I had so many spoilery questions I wanted to ask about Under specifically, like Under and Sandy and like the conversations that are occurring later on. So picking that question and trying to word it as vaguely as possible for
Yeah.
going by coastal with also spoilers, many spoilers, and Under was very very difficult. Um, but going back to what Dahlia said earlier, what I also loved, I think, about going by coastal is how Dahlia, you play with this idea of inevitability and also of the choice. I think that it is such an interesting concept to really be talking about, especially in this like sliding doors esque, kind of world. So I really loved watching that kind of evolve over two different choices. The next question I have is that for our main characters in the Do's and Donuts of Love and Everyone Hates Kelsey Miller, um, they both have to navigate rivalries and complicated emotions in relation to their rivalries, is kind of where I was going. And I wanted to know, how was it to create that opposite character, right? This like push and pull of another character who you like maybe kind of can't stand. And there, the experiences off the page, the histories off page versus you and bringing them in onto the page when you sort of balance that. And also if you if you cut any scenes from that you could share, maybe. Meredith, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I love enemies to lovers. I love that push and pull when you start with the like kind of snarkiness toward each other. I just think it's really fun. I like to read it, so I love to write it too. Because you're creating a foil to the character, and in many ways there are the similarities, but there's similarities in things they don't like about themselves, and so they'll point it out in the other person without even seeing it in themselves, which I think is a fun way of doing it. I write really skeletal, so I don't have any deleted scenes. I actually went the other way where my editor's like, oh, I think we need uh three more kind of flashback scenes to kind of get into more of what was off the page. So but it is interesting to build a story where the rivalry is long standing, where you're kind of dropping the reader in the middle of things because they've had this animosity, in my case, from when they were in kindergarten together, because they have competed against each other every year since, and she feels like she's lost most of the time but isn't giving up. So but yeah, the enemy dynamic is kind of also brings out an acceptance level when you later resolve it, and I like that about it, writing it.
With the Do's and Donuts of Love, I guess it's a little bit complicated in terms of the rivalry because they're exes. So as I was kind of writing them, having not such a pleasant time with each other because they've just broken up, I also had to kind of try and make it believable that they had, things in common because they obviously did date each other for like a whole year and they, had an entire relationship. So it was pretty difficult to actually like balance those things out and to write those things. What actually made it easier is that in the very first draft of the book that I wrote, there was an entire section. The first act of the book was actually with Sharon and Chris together, and then they had a breakup, and then they went, yeah, exactly, yeah, it was like a very different book, the first draft. I actually brought back like some of those scenes, so like the breakup and just like the first time they met. I brought them back in some flashbacks in this draft. So I did like repurpose some of those, but there were definitely like a lot of deleted scenes. So I remember the very first chapter of the first draft of the book actually had like Sharon and Chris together, and they were like in the park, and Chris was like bringing them like bubble tea to have, and she had brought like Sharon her favorite like flavor, and they were like walking around like holding hands, supporting each other. It was very sweet, and I kind of wish I could keep some of those. I had been able to keep some of those, but you know, for the sake of the story, unfortunately it didn't work out. But there were a lot of like sweet scenes between them in that very first draft.
Yeah, I love what you were saying earlier as well, Meredith, about like the way, and I think this is also why I like rival stories, is like the way that rivals can see pieces of you that like you can't necessarily see. You know, there's a piercing kind of intensity to strangers, that where they can kind of pick out these really raw, vulnerable pieces of ourselves which we didn't even know, or like haven't really fully realized it, and then they say that and you're like, oh ew, I kind of think that you're right about what you what you're saying to me right now. um I want to go to some of the questions from the audience. I love all of them so much, but one of them that I really love, which is that we talked a little bit about, you know, rep not being there when you were growing up. And so we have a really lovely question, which is, who is an author that inspired you to write the rep you needed? And what books are you loving now? This is a really hard this is a really hard one. Um, so I don't know who wants to start with with this one. Meredith, you want to start? Sorry.
I feel like I called that in class and like was daydreaming. I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to answer this question? So I did, as I said, I just read Hellbent and I really did love it. Let's see. You know, I read The Hate You Give, which was probably in this space that really first blockbuster diverse story, at least around the time when I started really paying attention to the YA sphere. I'm sure there were others before that, but that was around the time. And I just loved what Angie put on the page, what she was able to convey. And it kind of brought a different, like, oh, you know, we can be the main character. We don't have to be a side character. We don't have to start with white characters or straight characters first. And so I really, I would say that was the book that first influenced me to try to write my own story versus what I read growing up, which was very classic canon, which means that you don't see anybody on the screen.
Oh, Johnny, you go first.
Okay. I often like to say when it comes to like my first book, 1500 Miles from the Sun, that if you loved it, blame Becky Albertalli, and if you didn't like it, blame Becky Albertalli, because fully like 1500 Miles from the Sun was inspired by the question of like what would Simon Spears' journey be like if he was a brown Latino Tejano kid living in Corpus Christi, Texas, instead of a white boy living in Georgia, and like I was able to just the love that I had for Love Simon and Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda, like transcribe that in some way into like the love I have for Texas and for growing up here and for like my culture and my identities. Um, and I think even further, like in an intersectional sort of space, Adib Khorram's Darius the Great is Not Okay, like was the first time that I saw another language not be italicized. And like I remember fully reading that like in the span of and weekend, and then the Monday I came back to my manuscript, I like unitalicized every Spanish word in my manuscript. And so yeah, I think those two really just like set the foundation of what my writing wants to be and who I want to be as a creator. A book I'm loving right now, I am finishing a book that comes out next year called The No Girlfriend Rule, and it is like a sapphic story about like uh, a girl who like is not allowed to be at her boyfriend's like D&D table, so she finds like this like femme first, queer first sort of table to join, and like finds herself having like a girl group of friends in a femme space for the first time, and falling for the girl who plays the bard while also like still fully having a boyfriend. Like it's so messy but also so much fun. But yeah, that's what I'm loving right now.
So for me, actually very similar to Johnny, Becky Albertalli and Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda was definitely like a big inspiration for all my books, really. But also Sandhya Menon's When Diplomat Rishi was also really big for me, because I think Sandhya was probably like one of the first people writing like South Asian romance. And something I really loved is that like both the characters in Dimple are South Asian, which I feel like you don't see that, you know, even now you barely ever see that. I just thought that was amazing. So I think reading, you know, Becky and Sandhya, and then also Jenny Han, I felt like, oh wow, like there's diverse romance out there. Maybe I can write that too. And so that's kind of what inspired me to start writing YA romance specifically. And in terms of what I'm reading right now, I feel like I haven't picked up a book in 50 years because I'm on deadline for like 2 books right now. But two books released in 2023 that I really love are The Love Match by Priyanka Taslim, which is like Bangladeshi love triangle, tea shop, like super fun, fake dating. And also Delicious Monsters by Lizelle Samberry, which is like this amazing, beautiful haunted house book. So I highly recommend both of those.
Oh gosh, this is such a great question. It is also such a hard question to answer. Let me think here. I'm just gonna reiterate Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda. I remember when I first sat down to like get into and relate to. And I remember picking up that book and it just unlocked something for me. And I was like, gosh, this is the kind of story actually that I want to tell versus me trying to tell the story I think everybody else wants to read. And it was such a great thing. And I too, like you, Johnny, except I was like, what if the story is told through Bram's perspective? And that's what really like did it for me. You know, so that was such great. And then again, Johnny, like, why are you stealing all my answers? I'm not. I remember reading Darius the Great is Not Okay and really saying, this is what I want to do. Like this is where I want to be. This is the space I want to be in. And these are the kind of books I want to write. It's such an amazing book that tells such a great story. And as an overwriter, it taught me that sometimes you can tell the most beautiful story in the simplest ways, and it still has like this really lasting impact on you. So that for me was such a big thing. And then also another book that came out after mine, but still has also kind of shaped the way I write now is You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. This was the first time I really got to see like a queer Black character living you know, her best life, doing the things that she wanted to do while also struggling with the world that's you know, like not cheering for her, not rooting for her. And I know what that's like. I know it's like to be in a small town and things like that. And that book just did so much for me. A book I'm like you, Adiba. I'm like, what have I been reading recently? I don't know, because I've been on deadline also, and also I've been reading a lot of adult rom-com because I just want to get out of my head for a while. But I do know why that I read not last, probably the year before, that has stuck with me so hard, which is Kings of More by R. Eric Thomas. It is such an incredible book. It is hilarious. It is beautiful, and is a book I really needed to see, which is a love story between two queer Black boys who are best friends. It's not like a romantic love story. It's a platonic love story. And I really need to see that because what I love romance in YA. Seeing those friendship love stories really hits definitely, especially as a queer person where you know, like sometimes that's all you have is that other friend. It's such amazing story. And if you love Ferris Bueller's Day Off, you'll love that too. So definitely pick that one out.
Okay. The last question that I'm going to pick from the audience is, was there one scene that was particularly difficult / emotional to write? Maybe like a non-spoilery scene also as well. Dahlia, do you want to start?
Oh, I think that one is just for Johnny, actually.
Oh, no, I thought it said for everyone.
Oh, for everyone. Oh, sorry. Yes, it does. Sorry, I'm so tired. Um, not in this book, actually. Like I said, I went light. Home Field Advantage was like supposed to be my super light, fluffy romance, but because I had to set it somewhere people would care about football, that didn't really work with people not caring about being queer. And so that changed the book dramatically when I realized that like it was going to be the combination of those things. So a lot of those things are tough. For me, though, the most emotional scene that I have ever written that made me cry so many times every time I reread the book through like copy editing, past pages, anything, is a scene in Cool for the Summer. It's a coming out scene. It's been like almost 2 years, right? I can spoil it. Oh, it has been a full 2 years. I'm going to spoil it a little, which is where the main character, Lara, comes out to her mom. And when I wrote it, I was not yet out to mine. And so I wrote it as, and yes, that was 2 years ago. And so it was like the coming out scene I wished I could have. And every time I read it, I was conscious of that over and over and over. And then apparently, like a few months ago, my mom somehow like Googled me and went back to a tweet of mine about coming out and came over to my house and was like, so let's talk about that. What's that? And I haven't read the scene again because I'm like, it would be so weird to it was actually inspired by my telling her not to bother reading Going by Coastal, just because like I think my parents are kind of over reading my books and she thought I was trying to keep it from her. And she's like, well, why would she want to keep it from me? Oh no, it was actually because I didn't want her to read herself too much into the mother character. She does that. Um, and so she, dug and whatever. And I haven't read it again because like, yeah, it's now that I'm out to my mother, I'm like, I don't know how differently that scene would hit, but I like how hard it hit me for the few years leading up to it, and so that for me is like the scene. And then from there I went to Home Field Advantage. I made the main character's mom, well, one of them, her mom is bi, and out, and it like means a lot to the other main character, her love interest for that scene, what that she's bi. And so it's like my little evolution of getting there. So now I'm like, oh, now I'm out by mom. So anyway, that's mine.
I think for me, like difficult from like a technical standpoint for Under and Santi were here was like all of the mural scenes and like the technicalities of like creating murals, because I do not art whatsoever. I am terrible. And so like having to like YouTube hours of muraling videos to figure out how to mural and stuff like that was something I really had to go into to figure out exactly what one does in order to create art on a wall. For the emotional, there is like a section in Under and Santi were here where it's like a few letters passed between the two of them. And that like that scene has always, like from drafting it to even now, like been the one part of the book that makes me emotional. And it wasn't even my idea. It was fully my agent being like, you mentioned that they write letters to each other. Maybe you should write the letters and put them in there. And I'm like, if it destroys them as much as it destroys me reading this, like I'm gonna blame you. But yeah, that part is like the singular part that really gets me still. Yeah.
So for Kelsey, one of the reasons that I wrote it was my best friend died suddenly 5 years ago, I want to say now. And we had had a falling out not very long before she died. So when I wrote Kelsey, it was almost to heal from that and kind of have a chance to make things right that I didn't in life. So when I go and back and reread like the section where she, I guess it's kind of spoilery, but anyhow, but she apologizes, it that one gets me every time.
Um, I am so like Dahlia with this one. As You Walk On By was supposed to be my fun book. I like it's inspired by The Breakfast Club and Can't Hardly Wait. And I was like, oh my gosh, I had so much fun watching those movies growing up, and that's so awesome. It's set at a house party. They have dance offs and promposals. I was like, oh yes, it's gonna be happy, it's gonna be fluffy. Until I realized, like Dahlia, where I had set the book, and I was like, oh no, but we do have to talk about these things. And so there were a lot of difficult things that I had to confront in the book and in myself while writing it that really set me off. But there's two scenes that really got me emotionally, and I'll try not to spoil them. There's a character named River in the book, and they have a secret that they're carrying around with them that they reveal later on. And there's this scene where Theo and River kind of go on a dare to rectify something that happened in River's past. And having to write that, it's set around, kind of spoilery, but set around a death also. And it was so hard to write because I don't do well with like death and whatnot. But like actually confronting those emotions inside of me and dealing with the grief and what it's like to mourn someone, especially someone that you didn't get to tell how much they meant to you. It's always hard. And then there's another scene between Theo and his dad. It's a very heated scene after Theo's had his great night out. Well, not so great night out, partying and everything. It's a conversation with his dad where his dad kind of has to sit him down and remind him not the mistakes that he did, but the biggest mistake he did was not realizing the actions that he was taking as a Black boy in the South and the repercussions that could have come for the things that he did. And it was so hard to write because I think I wrote it not too long after everything that's happened with George Floyd and just the continuous news cycle of seeing dead Black people, murdered Black people, whatnot. Having to write that was so hard because now I had to actually confront these things I've been pushing aside because we've built this cycle in America where it's just like, oh, it happened again, we're moving on. And writing that scene, I couldn't move on anymore. I had to actually like deal with it, and that was so hard. But I think it was such a needed piece of this book and Theo's story.
That sounds amazing, Julian, just by the way. I can't follow that out personally just because The Do's and Donuts of Love is like a fun book and it's like, it's full of puns and all of that. I don't think there's any particularly like super emotional moment in the book. There is emotional moments, but nothing that I would say like particularly made me confront anything. In terms of difficulty, I think what was the most difficult about writing the book in general was trying to write the reality TV show components while making it readable. Because, reality TV is reality TV. It's not a book. So how do you kind of translate that into a book and still make it seem believable? I did watch a lot of reality TV shows in order to do that. I like on Netflix, if there's a cooking show or a baking show, I've watched it. Great British Bake Off, I've watched all of it. MasterChef, I've watched all of it. Australia, UK, USA, all of it. So I did watch a lot of that. And then I also watched like a lot of just like YouTube of people like making certain things as well, just to make sure that I kind of nailed what they were actually making and how to do it. And then I kind of tried to like add all of that in, but also do it very like on the surface. So if you are not necessarily somebody who knows the ins and outs of reality TV show or knows the ins and outs of baking, you would still be able to understand what was going on, but still engage with the text. But it was difficult to pull off, and definitely like that was one of the things as I was editing, I was adding things in, taking things away, and just being like, is this gonna work? Is this not gonna work? So it was a tough thing to do, but hopefully I pulled it off.
No, seriously, you really did. I was so amazed trying to tackle something like writing reality TV and writing baking, which are two like very technical things, I think you nailed it, because I was able to follow. I was like, oh, that's what it's like. So you did a great job.
Well, thank you so much to these amazing authors. And also thank you to the chat for the fantastic questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. The bookshop.org links for all of the books are down below. Please make sure to pre-order and also order, add to your TBR, everything like that. For all of the books below. Thank you so much to everyone. And I hope you all have a really great rest of your day.